And when they bowed their heads in that last prayer, he began to shoot. These were people like Ethel Lance, who had lost her daughter 2 years prior to breast cancer. But she would go around Mother Emanuel and clean the church, singing, "One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that's all I ask of you. Give me the strength to do every day what I have to do." Or it was our youngest victim, Tywanza Sanders. He had just finished college. The whole world was in front of him. But on that night, he stood in front of his 87-year-old great Aunt Susie and looked at the killer and said, "You don't have to do this. We mean no harm to you." Or it was people like Cynthia Hurd, whose life motto was simply to be kinder than necessary. That's who these people were. They weren't famous, but they loved their church, they loved their family, and they loved their community. And that was the first time there had been a shooting at a place of worship. Parents had to explain to their children for the first time how they were going to be safe, when in the safest of places. The next day, the killer's manifesto came out, and there he was all over the news with the Confederate flag. And many people in South Carolina look at the Confederate flag and it reminds them of their ancestors or service or heritage. They don't think of it as a way of hate. But he hijacked that. And then the first time the killer had to appear before the judge let the family speak. And each one of them stood up and looked at the killer, unplanned, unprompted, and forgave him. It was so overwhelming that kind of forgiveness and that kind of godly feeling just took over South Carolina. And we didn't have riots, we had vigils. We didn't have protests, we had hugs. I called for the Confederate flag to come down. We went through multiple days of debate that were pretty harsh, but at the end of the day, the great people of South Carolina stepped up and showed the world what grace and strength look like in the eyes of tragedy. It was tough because, naturally, South Carolina had the Confederate flag flying above the dome up until the year 2000. And they had a bitter dispute and ended up reconciling by putting it in front of the State House. And so there were a lot of bitter feelings, and I knew that. And so one of the things I did was, when I decided the flag needed to come down, I held meetings on that Monday morning, and I met with Republicans, I met with Democrats, I met with the congressional delegation, and I met with a group of business people. They didn't know why they were meeting with me. We kept it quiet, and when they came in, I said, "I'm going to have a press conference at 4 o'clock today and ask for the Confederate flag to come down. And if you will stand with me, I will forever be grateful. And if you won't, I won't tell anyone that you were in this meeting." And I had my husband there with me because I was scared I was going to be standing by myself at 4 o'clock at that press conference. But pleasantly surprising, we had people there. We had Strom Thurmond's son come to the press conference. We had a South Carolina senator who had Confederate memorabilia all over his office. He came and stood with us. And so it was a brutal debate. I remember the Senate, Senator Pinckney was one of the people that was murdered that night. It was his church. And when we got the call, I immediately called Senator Pinckney because I knew he was in the legislature that day. And I said, "Senator, I just heard about the shootings. I'm sending my investigative team there. I will be there first thing in the morning. We will do whatever the families need." And I said, "I'm just so very sorry." And it still haunts me to this day that phone was ringing in his pocket after he had been shot. And so when the Senate took up the bill, the Senate quickly passed it because their brother had died. That was, they had served with him, they knew him. When it got to the House, it was much different. And the Speaker of the House kept saying, this is going to be difficult, I don't know if we can do it. He showed up and he said, okay, they will bring the Confederate flag down, but they want to put another version of it up. And I said, go back, we're not putting another version, the flag has to come down. Speaker comes back a few days later and says, okay, we did it, flag is coming down, nothing else is going back up, but they want to leave the flagpole. Now, I have been in the legislature in South Carolina. I totally knew what they were doing. They were hoping that we would just let that happen, and then they would go back and put it right back up again. And so, I remember going and meeting with the legislators, and I said, look, this is not about monuments. This is about a flag. A flag is a living, breathing symbol of the people that's flying at the State House.